Welcome to List and Sells Ignition for 2016, prepared exclusively for the List and Sell Army and those of you who have attended List and Sell, the List and Sell tour in various states, and of course our real estate rock stars. So the first thing we want to talk about is what you focus on grows. You hear me say this all the time as it relates to your productivity, as it relates to your career. And of course, for us, the major focus that we're all acutely aware of is, of course, listings. A simple focus on getting more listings, GML. And this is fundamentally how we kick start the year, whether it be from a standing start or in this instance, getting us off the ground for a big year ahead. Listing always comes before selling. And I'm constantly trying to reinforce this. And every time you see me sign off on something with a moniker, we have the big listing nice and bold and the sell a little smaller. That's fundamentally because we want to draw your attention to the listing component. Listing is always the most important thing. You simply can't get into any trouble listing property. I mean, there's lots of things you can control inside the marketplace. You can't control, I should say. Buyer sentiment goes up and down. I agree that sales fluctuate because of consumer confidence. What your competitors are doing with their prices and properties can't be controlled. And there's a whole host of other things. So, at the end of the day, the only part of the transaction that you do have total control over is listings. So we always say that listing comes before selling, even if it's at the point of compromising the progress of a sale to get a listing. I'll do that because I can't get into trouble listing properties, and more listings equals more listings. Now, this is probably the theme that we have now developed over the last 6 months, because it's true. We talk about, from a prospecting perspective, starting out at foothold, moving into traction. Foothold, of course, being creating and giving yourself presence through marketing. Once you've gained presence, you become a consideration for people out there. One of the three players, as we say, who share 60 to 90% of the market. So you have to break that mold and dislodge one of those players and create presence. The second phase, of course, is then moving into traction. So once you've actually got that foothold, and I know some of our listeners out there, even this month, I see that Brendan Clark up there in southeast Queensland, I don't know if he's on here, but Brendan's done a fantastic job, of getting positioning on foothold on the main arteries, getting his sell with signs up, probably a couple of fat boys. I've got another guy down in the ACT, Steve Lowe, that might be listening now. And he's adopted the strategies and very, very quickly gotten a series of fat boys out, which we'll be showing you, during the course of the List and Sell tour. And those are out there to glean those initial signs. Once you've actually gotten that foothold, of course, then you move into traction. And from Perth yesterday, I was speaking to Lorraine Dove about the fact that, we're trying to get more active property sellers. And of course, that pertains purely and simply to making sure that you've gotten that foothold first. And then once you've got traction, you now have a voice inside the marketplace and you can start to weave that message down there. The third stage, of course, is momentum. And this is where we get into this state of flux where more listings equals more listings. It's a very simple analogy. Getting more listings actually gets more listings. I know that sounds like it's fairly obvious, but it is in fact true. We want to get ourselves into a state of flux. And from a standing start, when we're talking about ignition, that's the flux that we want to get. So with Sales Trainer Mentor, it's a very simple address. Those of you that are actually sitting there with pen in hand, if you just type at the top of the address bar on any web page, mentor, mentor, salestrainer.com.au. This will bring you into Mentor. You log into Mentor with the same username and password that you use for Sales Trainer Active, And you can go through this on a week-by-week basis, day-by-day recording. You can fast track it if you want to. I don't recommend you do. I recommend you adopt this. And if you're having trouble with establishing your why, setting your goals and objectives, this will sort it out for you. You know, goal setting is a skill that takes time, whether it be through trial and error, to perfect, but it just needs a start. All right, so the first, prospecting. In prospecting, this becomes a big issue, the primary active property seller protocols. This is where we have to start. If listings breed listings, then we have to look at the front end of the conveyor belt, and that, of course, is having incoming prospects all the time. So the first place I ask you to openly look at is the big three listings generators. This is where the hot inquiry comes into play. And those of you that have been to List and Sell would know that the number one by far and away is sales inquiry. And you know that we don't call it buyer inquiry because this creates connotations that inquiry is only populated by buyers. So all of the inquiry, the sales inquiry, people whether inquiring off a signboard, off the internet via email, attending your welcome homes, your open homes, all of these inquiries contain a proportion, a ratio of active property sellers. So these are the primary consideration. So sales inquiry and converting that over is the number one. Welcome homes, without doubt, the number two, and massive emphasis is being now placed upon this as we look at more advanced versions of turning the open for inspection into a welcome home and indeed your point of sale. And then, of course, that more medium to long term that does require a bit of patience and diligence, the regenerative prospector process. Now, throughout that entire process, there are components where you're going to have greater success than others, not least of which is things like some little quirky things we've done with the listed, which is now LA Woman. LA Woman, importantly, takes away from that correspondence the actual street number of the property and no photo of it. So if it goes out before the sign, we know for a fact that the seller must indeed, and that we know that the only type of inquiry we're going to get from it is an active property seller. Why? Because there's no signboard on the property, they don't know the actual address, and the correspondence is geared toward them. The second thing that we need to be looking at are the secondary active property seller protocols. So each of these three are something you need to address immediately today and exclusively. Don't be falling for any of these other prime prospecting methods like cold calling or otherwise. In order, we go to those primary, and then here we look at the secondary contacts. So you should all be carrying a contact list. Very important. Contacts meaning the top 10 imminent active property sellers that you've identified, and maybe more if you've got them, but at least that top 10. And then you look at each of these, as we'll soon be talking about, a day at a time, attacking them exclusively. The second thing to look at is withdrawals. Withdrawals are unfortunately overlooked in most real estate businesses. We kind of give up on them when they withdraw from the market thinking they're unmotivated. But when somebody actually puts a property on the market, it is literally a divorcing, a separation. They've decided to emotionally detach themselves from the property and move on from there. So most of them are back on the market within 6 months. So again, I say this is something that you look at in ignition, in starting up, in getting that initial spark at the beginning of the year. For sale by owners, they go without saying, if you haven't taken the time to register on all of the private seller sites, obviously registering with all of your service areas on there so that you're getting alerts and you're entirely across anyone that's selling privately, I absolutely urge you to do this now. To let by owners, every property investor is selling. So if you call these and they've got them privately listed to rent, and you simply say, hi, I've noticed you've got a property available. Is it still available? They say yes. You just say, look, do you want to sell it? Now, in 9 cases out of 10, they'll immediately respond with how much. to that, you say, well, can I have a look at it? I'm a real estate agent, and again, it becomes a great spot for a sign. Other agent signs down, OASD, this is what it stands for. You need to be across all of your competition, keeping strong records. But the moment that sign goes down, it is most definitely open season, and you need to focus very, very heavily on that. And then, of course, those expired listings. So any of the listings of yours that are coming up for expiration, get straight back onto them and re-signing them. And of course, talk to your fellow team members and keep an eye on them. Quite often the relationship's broken down and they're about to give up. So ask if you can have a shot at the title and maybe share it. These again are the most important things. Now, that first thing was that listings to get. You need to sit down and put that listing, that target or that sheet, that run of properties that are imminent, have that clearly visible in the line of sight from wherever you sit, whether it be at a home office, whether it be at the office itself, so that it's staring you in the face. The first thing to do is get that list on the board and then start to examine what stage are you in. If you recollect from what we talked about with the reverse engineering, that after we've done a listing presentation, so if these people have yet to do a listing presentation, well, that's a matter of timing and still keeping them informed as to what's going on, but making that initial appointment. When you do make that initial appointment, for goodness sake, be thorough. Make sure that a pre-listing kit, as they refer to it, or prelude that we refer to inside a property marketer, goes out, and that it's highly professional. That you do conduct the pre-listing conversation or the appointment discussion and obtain that information and set up an anticipative seller. Then, of course, if you've actually been out and already presented to these people on this listings to get list, well, then we're probably in the selection phase. And this is where it becomes important that they're receiving something, the market roundup on a monthly basis on the same day, each month, that is consistent and reliable. If you don't have a market roundup through Property Marketer, ensure that you're doing something that is similar to that. And then, of course, go to Sales Trainer, and those text messaging your results is also very, very important. As you look at each of these listings one at a time, ask yourself what actions, which we've just talked about, what actions could I take to win each of these listings? So from there, I grab each of those actions and I simply just go ahead and do them. All right, now that we move over to price reductions would be the next thing. So we're looking at each of these things one at a time. The next one being that we need to look at our existing listings as they stand and start to focus on, quite frankly, moving into the new year, igniting the new year, any listings that you've got, and looking very carefully at the motive, and then starting to deal with that motive and deal with price to get these properties cleared out. So as we go around the various states and countries, I would say those of you that are in Perth at the moment, or Western Australia, a lot of those markets are suffering. So this becomes very, very important. I know that the same is starting to be felt in some of the other states and certainly some areas over in good old New Zealand. So remembering with uncovering that emotional dominant reason at the bottom, most sellers will give you the superficial reason at the top. We have to work our way down to the bottom. So they'll tell you pretty much what or where they are trying to do or go, what they're trying to do or where they're trying to go. But we need to dig down deeper than this. So in piecemeal fashion, we keep saying, why? Why would you want to do this? And what we're looking for is that seller to push back. And if they push back and snap at us and say, this is why and this is because, then you can be assured that there's some sort of strong motive there. Which then leads us to the final question that we ask over a period of time: when does this have to be done by? And what we're looking for is enabling us to put each of these sellers, the top one there being an A-class, 3-star, whatever you want to call it, those sellers that absolutely must sell. They're the ones that we don't require too much work on other than to simply find a buyer. So these would be my premier lead listings that I would be focused on getting buyers for and getting them moved on. By virtue of the fact that they know what they're trying to do, where they're trying to go, why they're trying to do it, they have a deadline, they absolutely must sell, which means that if we don't do the job, the next agent will. So you need to be very firm and very decisive about the actions you take on these listings. The second category, which would be B class, 2-star, or anything you like to call them, these are the ones that would sell if the right circumstance prevailed. Now, these are the sellers that have said to you they would reduce if they could find something to buy, or whatever they look at to buy seems to be priced at a certain amount, therefore they need X amount of dollars. Or worst case scenario, that they already have committed somewhere else and they've bought and they've paid, and because of that, they now need a certain amount of money from this particular property. Well, I would suggest to you that these are all A-class listings in the making. You just need to determine that motive and push on that as you move forward to get it sorted. Third thing, they might sell if the right price is achieved. This is a C-class listing. Now, if you can, beyond any shadow of a doubt, ascertain that although they know what they're trying to do, they're not concerned as to whether or not they definitely don't have a deadline and in fact are already planning for it to fail, I would leave these aside and not be too concerned about them at all, given that they are C-class listings. So they're a good spot for a sign. I will have gotten the relationship to a certain point and try to maintain that, but they would be fully conversant with the fact that their expectations are just a little bit ahead of the marketplace and that it's not likely to occur. All right, now we move to the sell function. Having actually focused on, first and foremost, prospecting, then moving to the listing component, then moving to having taken care of the sell side of it, the price expectation side of it, we now start to look at selling. Now, this is always achieved around the open homes, which is a two-edged sword, in that if we create activity around the open for inspections, especially with those listings that are well priced, well, then we're going to move them out, but also fundamentally we're going to meet more property sellers. So I say it's always around activity around the open home. So be opening just about everything if I'm at a standing start. So if the year's taken off and you feel like it's not jolting the way that it should, this weekend, open everything you have available and even ask some of your colleagues who might be not on the weekend if you can open a couple more of their properties if they'd like you to. Because purely and simply, activity creates activity. And this is the primary function that I look at any real estate business when it's suffering. I say, look, open everything. This will lift not just the sales, but the activity around the open for inspections promotes prospects, promotes more listing, active property sellers, and moves everything forward. And then, of course, once you've gotten that inquiry lift, you get in there and qualify. Definitely with the assumptive close, definitely with an attitude of serving, but this is what gets you kick-started. When it comes to prospecting, you are looking for a daily listing appointment. Stop looking for 2, stop looking for 3. As you prospect each day, your sole aim, your only aim, is to get a listing presentation today for tomorrow. And then when we look at the listing chart and each of the listings that you have up there, I know that I've said look at them, your top 10 or whatever they might be. But the next thing I would suggest that you do is rank them in order of priority. The one that you think is easiest to actually get, have that at the top of the list and all the way down to the one that you think you're going to struggle with. Now, we know that we've looked at the actions that you need to take to get those listings across the line. But as you come in each day, I simply say this to you. Focus on one listing, one day at a time. So I choose my focal point and I'll say that this is the listing that I'm going to focus upon. I've often been known to ring that prospective seller, that active property seller, and say to them, today is 16 Excelsior Avenues day. And they say, what do you mean? Today is the day that I've decided that you're going to put your property on the market. Now, for some of you might think that's a bit cheeky, but believe you me, stating it up front creates a sense of obligation, creates a sense of excitement, and creates a platform by which that person feels like you're focusing upon them and can actually get that thing across the line. With your price reductions, you need to quite simply, call all your existing property sellers every single day. Now, this is especially apparent when you're trying to kick-start your year. You're trying to kick-start activity. And all you do is you call them is ask a series of questions. Yeah? Now, I'll just pause on that. In fact, I'll even go back, because of the series of questions that I say that you should ask, and they're very, very simplistic, because you need to be tucking these owners into bed, focused on a price each day. So one of the questions I would be asking them, not every day the same question, but when I call them, I would say, look, what are you going to do if this doesn't work out? Now, the answer to that question, what are you going to do if this doesn't work out, tells you a lot about the motive, the correlation that we just started to talk about back there. If somebody says it has to work out, almost straight off the bat, you can safely assume that that's an A grade listing. They know what they're trying to do, where they're trying to go, why they're trying to do it, and of course they have a deadline. Now, if they say that, well, if it doesn't work out, we're going to rent it out, this could still be probably a B class listing that might even be a hidden A, in that they're, for want of a better word, bullshitting you. And we have to be able to cut through that bullshit. And one of the best ways to cut through it is to then move on. So look, hypothetically, whatever their price might be, think of what it needs to be to actually sell, and then lower it by about another 5%. So if someone had a property on the market at 330, I felt that it had to be 300,000. I would probably say, hypothetically, if I had a buyer right now at 285,000, what would you do? You're going to take a deep breath when you do this, because they might just unhinge a little bit. But mark my words, if they blow up and they explode, I say, hey, I didn't say we had a buyer. I said, what would you do if we had a buyer? But now that that number's on the table, you can be assured that they'll be staring at the ceiling, chewing that over, and you're beginning to manage price expectation, or fairly radically, mind you. Now, of course, when you say that hypothetical number, they're quite calm about it, they take it on board, well, that tells you a lot about what's going on. That also tells me that they're quite likely selling. So you've got to ask lots of questions. Now, we've got to focus on the get more listings, maximum productivity. Now we're going to talk about the do part. Is no accident. It's the result of a premeditated, thoughtful, and constructed routine that delivers predictable results. So now that you're in the office and we've got the head right, let's look at the things that you need to be getting sorted out to ignite yourself and get this year really flowing along beautifully. You need to be focused. You need to be prepared. Proactive, responsible, adaptable. Most important that you'll be able to adapt to the market. You keep a Spartan office, not too much clutter around. You're optimistic. Please understand, optimism is merely a decision. You expect good fortune to come your way. And then finally, you need to have that sense of urgency. Now, if we go back to the top of the list, you're focused. And your primary focus, as we said, is listing. Listing always comes before selling. Prepared means you're mentally prepared as well as practically prepared. You're proactive. Classic examples of proactivity are calling your sellers every single day. Sowing seeds, getting them tucked into bed, staring at the ceiling, chewing over numbers. All of this is proactive behavior. So we get these attributes in order, and then we avoid this 1 in 4 syndrome. Now, if you leave things up to reactive behavior, so if you wait for the market to deal you blows, this is what you're quite likely to be stuck on. If you fall into the pattern of what we call focal shifts, so month one, quite often what I see salespeople do, individual salespeople do, is they focus exclusively on prospecting and nothing else. Now, this, whilst it sounds admirable, is quite good, but of course, if you're totally focused on just locating active property sellers, then inevitably your results have to falter. you'll end up in a situation where you have a bad sales month. And this is quite harrowing. This is unfortunately where people start to give up. Now, as you get those listings, as you get those prospects, and you want to convert them across to listings, we now see you move your focus exclusively in month 2 to signing them up. And of course, as you sign them up, invariably you make a couple sales, just enough to just get by, to just feel like you've dodged a bullet. It's not a great month, it's not a disaster, but it's just kind of okay, but still less than acceptable. Of course, at the end of that month, you're left with a whole lot of properties where the owners have high price expectation. A lot of those B grade sellers, maybe a few C grade sellers, we develop a healthy sense of cynicism sometimes. But of course, as you focus on addressing those issues around that over expectation on what the market might do, you start to get those reductions down. Again, you make just enough reductions, those properties are snapped up, and you make enough sales to get by. And then, of course, we move into that 4th month. Many of you have seen me explain this, where you have a sales bonanza. Now, the problem with this is, you do get to feel really good here, but you also get to feel really shitty here and fairly ordinary through. But this one cancels out that, and all this makes out for is mediocre results, but at worst fluctuating. At best, you hope that this really big month is enough to sustain you for the rest. The problem is focal shift. So what we have to start doing, what you have to start taking control of, is that an understanding that productivity routine calls for balanced performance. You need to be running all 4 aspects of the sales cycle. It is quite simple. This is created by not just understanding it, but having specific goals and some sort of related plan to it. You see, what we were just describing there, if you really have a look at that 1 in 4 syndrome, it's the 4 functions that really constitute a salesperson's job description. Prospecting is absolutely necessary. In fact, it's the most critical thing to moving forward. So you need to be finding new and nurturing existing clients. Presentations, the listing part, conducting listing presentations to prospective clients. You need to be doing this every day. Thirdly, you need to be managing price expectation. Now, I know that this sometimes seems like long-term and what you might be doing today doesn't materialize for weeks on end, but the reality is that it needs to be a function that you attend to every day if you want to have consistency in results. And of course, it's a given, you need to be showing buyers property and running open homes to ensure that sales are occurring. Now, I've got to tell you, for me, this was the least palatable part of the transaction. I never enjoyed working with buyers. For me, it was always about listing properties and managing price expectation. Never seemed to take care of itself. But nonetheless, each needs to be focused on in equal amounts if we are to succeed as a salesperson. So, how do we make this work? Now, we already said that you need to understand the routine behavior and the functions. We've got that in place. Next thing you need to do is have goals and targets. You need specific goals. So if you haven't addressed this, go back to the beginning of this presentation, jump onto Sales Trainer Mentor. That's mentor.salestrainer.com.au. Get on there and start learning how to put your why in place. But it all starts with you setting up your 5-year destination. Now, this doesn't have to be specific, but you need a loosely drawn up picture of how you'd like your life to look in every imaginable way in 5 years' time. Then we come back to the 3-year mark with the 5-year destination in mind and start setting some goals that will enable us to get to where we want to in 5 years. Then we bring that back to yearly goals. What are you going to do this year? Remembering that a goal is mandatory. In the same way you can't get someone half pregnant, you cannot get half a goal. So be very clear and also very conservative when you're setting your goals, because they need to be, for you, mandatory. Targets, however, are aspirational. Target is something you take aim at but don't necessarily hit. So you can be a bit looser with your targets and pin these to things like your best month ever, your benchmarks that you're trying to surpass, your best month, I should say, and that becomes important. You then bring these down quite simply into quarterly targets. So divide it up by 4 and say these are the targets that I have for each quarter, and then you run the associated plans. And then importantly, around the 28th of each month, because I always cut the month off. For me, the month ends on the 28th, and those in-between days is when I sit down and plan ahead for the month to follow. Cleverly, if you're in a sales team where the leader is across this, then I have every reason to believe that they would have you focused on things like getting price reductions in order on the 25th of the month ahead of the new month coming so that you can premeditate sales. Weekly plans and routines then become absolutely important, but what we're going to talk about here is how this all comes down to be able to follow in pattern a simply daily routine. Now, there needs to be, in setting up your routine, you need to make certain decisions. The first decision you need to make is how many days are you going to commit to working each week. Now, just be brave about this. It should be no more than 5. And if it gets past 5, then I believe you've got a little bit of a problem. So lock it into 5. Then you need to figure out which days are dedicated to your career each week. So if you like to play golf on a Wednesday or something on a Thursday, lock it in and say, I don't work. For me, I just discarded Sundays altogether. I just think it's unnecessary. Yes, I believe for many of you that Saturday is still game day and it needs to stay that way, or maybe Sunday's game day and eliminate Saturday. Again, I'll leave that to you. And then you figure out how many hours on each of those days you need to commit. Now, if I was working a 60-hour week, and I would be thinking to myself, how do I do 60 hours 4 days a week, for argument's sake? But again, I'll leave that to you. You must but it's not reactive behavior. Don't look at planning your week and say, well, I'll just have to be around according to when I'm needed to be there. You decide how it works. You make the decisions proactively rather than reactively. Then you need to make some decisions around having set your goals in place. How many prospects do you need? How many prospects do you need each day? And this is obviously worked out against your presentation to list ratio. So how many presentations do you need per day? How many price reduction appointments do you need to make per week? R2S, which stands for reduce to sell. And how many buyer appointments do you need, inclusive of open homes do you have to present to make this all happen? And then we just set about putting together plans on each of those 4 functions. What do I have to do prospecting-wise to deliver on those prospects? How many of those presentations do I need to do, or what work do I need to do on my listing presentation to win those listings? Now, winning them is one thing. It's also part of the listing function is how do you set them up so that they run smoothly in the reduce to sell phase? So again, there needs to be planning around that. If this is an area that you need to lift your game in, or you need to be more disciplined in making sure that you see people, then you need to set plans in place that cause this to happen. And then the same with sales. How many open for inspections do you need to do? What sort of improvements do you need to be making with follow-up? Do you need to be able to set people up for the go-wrongs that occur inside of a transaction? All of these things need to be paid attention to. And in doing this, you need to understand our ratios and statistics. Now, there's 2 different things that are at large here. A ratio, a productivity ratio, is X amount of effort put in for X amount of results. So how many listing presentations do I have to conduct to how many listings I actually win? That is a presentation to list ratio in this hand. So number of presentations to active sellers compared to those listed. List to sell ratio, when I list a property, of all the properties I list, how many actually sell? Now, it's important knowing these because this enables you to put the plans in place. How many buyer appointments or open for inspections do I need to run before I've actually effected a sale? Now, understanding this, it simply says to you, well, you need to lift the number if you want to meet those productivity ratios. Then we move to statistics, or what we call ratings. Days on market are important. So the number of days it's taking to sell, I dare say that over in Perth, which I mentioned earlier, it's probably getting a little bit longer in the tooth, and you do need to pay attention to this because if you can lower the days on market by 1/3, your productivity will typically increase by, I say 200 or 300%, but in fact, I've proven that it's up around 400%. So you'll quadruple your productivity. Now to the diary. If you haven't If you've been struggling with productivity, if you're unhappy with your success ratios, I absolutely urge you to take my advice and move back to the old-fashioned written diary, paper-based day-to-a-page diary. And if you're setting up that page, just make sure it looks like this. You have the big three in place. A listing presentation is written up in yellow with a yellow highlighter across it. This is these time of appointments. A price reduction is highlighted in green and a buyer appointment is highlighted in orange. If you do this, then at a glance on each page, so long as those three colours are evident, then you know that you're setting up to win, because an appointment is an opportunity to produce. At the top of the page, we put today's results. And today's results pertains to those three things below. We are looking to premeditatively focus on one of those results. A new listing, exclusive listing or auction listing started. A sale agreed to, or a sale that's gone from agreement to unconditional. That's the third type of result. And then, of course, the fourth is reducing a price to a level that will actually sell the property. So also in your diary, you want to have today's results, which we've just talked up the top. You need to set block times in place. Block times meaning that you'll have a little section cordoned off to prospect for a listing, bearing in mind you don't go at that with this attitude, oh, I need to call 10 before 10 or 100 or 150 or whatever it might be. No, what I do is I look at it and say I'm going to call until I win a listing presentation with an active property seller for tomorrow. You definitely need to have your to-do list there. And I mean, this becomes an outpouring. Everything that you actually think you need to do, get it out on paper, because even if you get it out on paper and you're looking at it, you think, well, that's really superfluous, I don't need to do it, then you can put a line through it and it actually clears up the clutter in your head. So to-do lists, in my mind, are absolutely sublime. You need to have checkpoints, not check times, as it says there. A checkpoint is merely you spacing it out. So let's say that I had a goal of 10 listings for the month. Now, common sense would tell you that halfway through the month, around the 15th, I would probably have a checkpoint of 10. Well, it's actually not that. That's not true. And I hope this makes sense. When we're actually setting goals, productivity goals, you should be aiming to accomplish half the goal in a third of the time. So this would mean on the 10th, we would expect to be at 5 listings if we had a goal of 10. Why we do this is if we've fallen behind, then we've left ourselves plenty of time to catch up. And we're also at the energetic part of the innings. So there's every chance that you're going to succeed, rather than when I see people, they evenly space it out. They get to the point where they're tired. They feel like they're not going to be able to make it. So they just leave it to next month. You never do this. All right, in managing client expectation, you understand that acting is about anticipating. So fundamentally, right after you sign those listings up, setting that property up for sell becomes the most critical thing. Communicating, which means that you are communicating with them every day. We've talked about this. And then if you have to, bringing it back. Here's the way the perfect real estate day works. The perfect real estate day is the result of a well-designed and prepared plan set up the day before. This is fundamental. Premeditated results of listings and sales will only eventuate in the occurrence of the right set of circumstances prepared well in advance. So it's premeditated behaviour. Here are the circumstances that produce results. So the day before, I make sure that my communication is in place and I'm constantly talking to my owners ahead of time. I don't leave tomorrow what I can do today. So I'm even calling people on the way from the office to home and calling them on the way into the office. The regenerative prospecting process is absolutely vital, that you see that those things are occurring. This is one of the first things when you actually start to have some success that seems to be forgotten. We take the emphasis off the regenerative prospecting process when in fact that was the very thing that was giving us those listing opportunities. So always remember to keep a focus on that and make sure that you are keeping up to date with the just listeds going out, with the follow-up, with the invitations for the open for inspections and the like, with the market roundup going out and so on. Same with the we have recently sold. Imminent listings, I focus on those. What have I got coming up and what is going to be my focal point tomorrow? Remembering it's one listing, one day at a time. How's my results communication? Yeah. Have we sold properties today, and has that gone out to any of my gestation sellers that are in the selection phase? And what sales do I have cooking? What can I do today that might make this happen for sure tomorrow, or maybe even bring it to a head tonight? When I wake up in the morning, if I've got a full set of appointments, if I've done what I'm supposed to have done and set my appointments up the day before, when you wake up in the morning, you will not hit that snooze button, because you'll just jump up. In fact, most of the time when you've got a full day, you'll wake up before the alarm clock. If you do have to exercise your mind and body, please do it in the morning. Our business is a late night orientation. You'll find yourself missing your gym appointments or anything else if you leave it for the afternoon. Breakfast, if you've got to eat it. Yep, I say definitely get in there and get going. Important that you follow affirmations. These are one of the most important things that you can do. It might sound a bit hocus pocusy, but programming that biological computer is all important, and then start thinking and focusing on what matters today. What are my results for today? Start forecasting in your own mind which way you're going to go. On the way into the office, this is part of your routine. Always drive a different way. You'll never know when the smallest piece of information will serve you well. But really importantly, if you drive into areas where you know that there should be more properties for sale, then you can get an idea. What you focus on grows, and you'll probably pick up more listings. I say get psyched. You be careful about the conversations you have to yourself. Always listen to training CDs on the way into work, never on the way home. That's the time to shut down. But now, get them on there and have a go. Following up, important, if you had a price reduction that was on the night before and they hadn't actually, even if they had agreed to it, ring them up, welcome them back to the market, get the day's play underway, confirm it, make it happen. If they didn't reduce, talk to them again. Who knows? They may have rethought their position and they want to now bring the property back. And I always talk to each one of my owners at least one morning on the way into the office. So if you're looking after 10 owners, that would be 2, maybe 3 if you're only working 4 days during the week that I would speak to on any given day on the way into the office. So make those calls first thing and early. Don't make them all early. You'll only piss them off. When I get to the office, I greet the team with sheer enthusiasm, shaking hands, giving ladies a hug or holding their hands, whatever the case might be. I just pump myself up. The first call of the day, this is habitual, is the one that I'm fearing the most. The one that's concerning me the most is the one that I attack full on, head on, first up. I then check incoming messages. I look then to the new inquiry that's come in and looking, of course, for any listing appointments. I make sure that all of my appointments that I have are thoroughly prepared, especially around the pre-listing kits and things like that they've gone out. I then, if any one of them look dicey, I ring that particular owner and confirm that we're on that day for that listing appointment, and then I just move to listings, move to sales, and then I'm pretty much right. And it's then that I have a coffee. Now, I don't go into the office and start with coffee. I go back to that list you just saw on the preceding slide, and I make sure that I get those things, get the day in play, and then I can move to the well-earned break. Once this habitual behaviour is in play, all I've got to focus on now, I've got my appointments to run. All I've got to worry about now is making sure that those come to fruition. For tomorrow, I'm focused on making sure I've got appointments. This is compulsory, so that the next working day is set up. If those two things in play, well, now I can either work on the next day, that's optional, or I can just goof off and call it quits. This is how it all works. Don't forget that we've got the List and Sell tour on for the remainder of this year. If you haven't booked, this is the way to go. I hope that this recording serves as a good reminder, but importantly, if you're having trouble igniting your year, all we say to you is get on the phone, give us a call. I'm more than happy to talk to you and get you sparked up in correlation to what you're seeing here. So have a big, big year ahead. Hope to see you very soon on the List and Sell tour, and of course contributing those wonderful results to the List and Sell army. My name's Mark Dwyer, and can't wait to talk to you soon. List and Sell.